For a long time, I looked wealthy on paper. I was an engineer, good career, good salary. My wife had a good career too. Dual incomes, valuable home, a family, nice vacations, and the cars you're supposed to have at that certain point in your life. And if you ran the numbers on the surface level, things look pretty fine. But I had this quiet sort of nagging feeling that I wasn't quite making any progress, and not toward retirement, toward the thing that I actually wanted, which was work optional. I wanted to get out of the grind of, working for another 20 years to retire at 65 when my health years are already behind me. And then my marriage ended. And that divorce was one of the hardest experiences of my life. Dissolving all your assets, splitting everything down the middle, creating some sort of visitation schedule for our son. And it takes a toll on you. And I'm definitely not going to minimize that. But it also forced me to sit down and think a little bit more about my income and answer the question honestly, where am I actually at? And the answer was pretty uncomfortable. Despite years of solid earnings, funding with all the sort of surface level markers of success, I wasn't making progress toward being financially independent. And I was essentially at this point starting over. The net worth that I had accumulated didn't match the sort of income that we were producing year over year. And I needed to close that gap. And that's when I found a better scorecard. And it's a single number that told me the truth of actually about where I stood. And I built my entire financial system around that number. And within a few years, I had hit work optional at 38. And I now run CreativeVest an asset management company, a registered investment advisor, managing over $15 million in assets as of the recording of this video. And I use the same system to manage their assets as I use to build wealth myself. And the number, that freedom multiple, that's what changed everything for me. And in this video, I'm going to show you the 7 levels of wealth and the corresponding freedom multiple that you need to be at every one of those levels of wealth. And then I'm going to show you the specific trap that's preventing you from moving to the next level and what you can do about it. Let's get into it. Before we get into the 7 levels of wealth, I want to share with you this cheat sheet that I created that you can get access to right now inside of Financial Engineering School. You can actually get access to this cheat sheet along with other cheat sheets and great assets just like this to help you identify where you're at and where you need to go in your next logical step that'll help you step through what makes sense for you moving forward. So if you want this, the link is in the description somewhere. You can go and you can check it out. From there, I want to talk to you a little bit about why most high earners, analytically minded people are playing with the wrong scorecard. And this particular framework, the freedom multiple and its corresponding levels of wealth, that's what's going to help you make that shift. And so your freedom multiple tells you basically how many years of life you actually own. The thing is, the salaries, the net worth, the account balances, all that stuff like that, those are all vanity metrics if they're not aligned properly with a goal in mind. And none of them really tell you how free you really are. And so the freedom multiple is different in that sense. And most 6-figure earners, have a freedom multiple under 2. And work optional starts at 25. And so that gap is really the whole game that we want to play. And so, for instance, if you are sitting at a free, let's say you have a $250,000 salary and your freedom multiple is 0.8, well, that basically means that within several months, less than a year, if you get laid off or something happens, you're kind of out of it, right? And so the freedom multiple helps you get a better understanding of what's wealth and what isn't. And if you're trapped in that salary and you've got a low freedom multiple, that's really a dependency problem. You're dependent on that income. And so let me just pop through the several levels that we're going to talk about. We're talking about dependency. We're going to talk about self-sufficiency, the foundation, stability. And that's really where the freedom multiple starts to play an important role. And then we'll talk about flexibility, work optional, and then, of course, a living legacy. All right, so let's dive into level one. I want to talk about a dependency. So, dependency basically means that somebody else really funds your life. You really have no agency over what's going on in your life, no margin, and you really haven't quite started yet. Basically, the sources of your income are generated from parents, families, maybe government benefits or consumer debt, and not a lot of it's self generated, right? We're not hitting here as well as we'd like to. And so the trap here is that dependency sort of feels safe, basically until it doesn't. And the stability is mostly borrowed, right? You're borrowing it from your parents, you're borrowing it from debt, from a system that is ultimately outside of your control. And the real unlock here is that you want to be able to generate your first dollar of independence. That's going to be a job, a skill, something valuable that you can trade for income. And just keep in mind that the income has no ceiling. That's really a mindset issue. But the important part here is that you want to create margin before you do anything else. It's not important at this point to start, investing and start those kinds of things. You want to focus on your income and generating your income, learning those valuable skills that translate into income and getting that up. At this point, your freedom multiple is basically zero. And your income, it's basically your wealth is outside of your control. Your income's outside of your control. And so everything else in this framework requires obviously that you have an income. And so if you're at this level, then that's the thing that you need to work on. All right, so let's talk a little bit about self-sufficiency because that's level two. So level two, you're actually earning independently. But the chances are you're spending everything and you're probably only one missed paycheck before everything falls apart. And you can look at this graph, and essentially what's happening here is that as your income is increasing, so is your lifestyle. Your lifestyle is just trading, you're just trading time for money, and the gap never really appears. Every raise becomes more lifestyle, and you need to have that gap between the income and the lifestyle in order to really make a change in your life. And so the trap here is that I'll save more when I make more. And chances are you won't. Lifestyle expands to consume income at every salary level if you let it. And so waiting for a higher income is just a way to trap yourself. The unlock here really is to automatically transfer at least 5% of your income every paycheck into an account that you don't touch. And the amount at this point really doesn't matter all that much. It's really about creating that savings muscle, and you want to automate it before you can spend it. And so every opportunity you get to focus on increasing your savings rate, that's exactly what you want to do here. Now, the freedom multiple at this point really only moves when money is redirected before the lifestyle creep comes in. And automation is the best system that works here. You don't want to rely on discipline. You don't want to rely on willpower for this. And so at this point, your freedom multiple is under zero point 0.5, but there's opportunity here. Right. And so let's move on to the what would be considered level number three or wealth level number three. And this is your foundation. Typically, in your foundation, you look like you're succeeding, right? But it still feels a bit fragile. Your freedom multiple is probably somewhere along the lines between a zero point 0.5, which means that you could handle, like if you got laid off, you could handle 6 months without income, and a 2, like you've got 2 years of income saved and invested, right? So you've got an emergency fund, investments have started, you don't have any credit card debt. And so that really feels like success. The problem is that you probably have the wrong type of account sequence going through. And so the thing is that you've got to correct and get the scattered accounts aligned with the goal, right? So you got to go from having old 401ks and random brokerage accounts and a new 401k and a Roth IRA, just kind of randomly invested and scattered to the wind, to a sequence and investment that matches the goal. And so the trap here really is that the bigger paycheck, the bigger the illusion, right? And so the high income at this level is masked as a freedom multiple that's actually pretty low. And so most engineers that I work with that are at these big tech companies, they sometimes live here and don't really know it. And so the unlock here is to calculate your freedom multiple, calculate your freedom number, build your tax efficient account structure, and with the goal of financial independence in mind. And the order that your dollars flow into these accounts sometimes matters a lot more than just the amount that you're putting into these accounts. And so the takeaway here is that most high earners overfund accounts sometimes have solved already problems for themselves. And so that brings us to our next level of wealth, and that is stability. And so at this point, you're building critical mass, but there's not a lot of urgency behind it. You probably have your freedom multiple is probably somewhere between 2 and 5 years of available money expenses. So 2 to 5 years of expenses invested at this point. You've got savings, you've got investments, your 401k is growing, but you're still 15 to 20 years out from freedom. And the freedom timeline that you're looking at is still 65 years old when the healthiest years are behind you. And so here's what it looks like in a lot of cases for people. You have this 401k that you're pumping money into, but that's the trap, right? That keeps you locked in that job until 65, because if you start to withdraw money from that 401k early, you have to pay taxes and you have penalties and you have all these things, right? And the issue here too is that the freedom multiple is quite low still, right? So you're still barely moving. It feels like you're growing because you've got this big 401k or you've got a nice balance in there, and that balance is growing slowly over the time. Maybe you're invested in index funds, but the freedom multiple really isn't keeping up. So the trap here is sort of this passive set it and forget it without urgency, right? And so your account growth gets mistaken for freedom progress and a growing balance. While that feels like momentum, if it's not moving your freedom multiple closer to that 25, which is where we want to really unlock things, then you're not moving toward the goal. And so the unlock here is to shift from just saving for retirement to really buying back those years. And so it means that you've got to get out of those accounts that are just the 401k. So each dollar, of investable assets, that dollar needs to work toward buying back your time. And so at this point, you really want to start measuring your freedom multiple more often, either quarterly or annually, whichever works for you. But the idea here is also that you want to start looking for opportunities to accelerate your growth with assets that outperform. Being stuck in just that set it and forget it index fund is not going to move you closer to your goal fast enough. There are really primarily only 3 levers to investing. I teach this all the time inside of financial engineering school. And by the way, again, if you'd like to calculate your exact freedom number and you want access to really great cheat sheets just like this, you can get them inside of financial engineering school. It's absolutely free. It takes about 30 seconds to sign up. The link is in the description. But the takeaway here is that a growing 401k balance is not necessarily the same as an elevating or accelerating freedom multiple. And so the urgency needs to take over. You have to find alternative ways to get investments and to get money into investments that outperform. And they're out there, but you've got to find them. Okay. So that moves us on to level number 5. And so level number 5 is flexibility. And at this point, your freedom multiple, remember, that's the years of expenses that you have saved and invested. So at this point, you have 10 to 15 years of expenses saved and invested, and it feels good. The pressure is off. But this is where a lot of times complacency can sit in. At this point, your assets cover basic expenses, but you probably could survive years without an income, but the freedom multiple isn't quite at that threshold of work optional. Okay. And so while the freedom multiple of 10 to 15 feels safe, there's still a gap to 25 that you need to fill. And so the trap here is that flexibility feels good enough that most people stop feeling the urgency about getting to work optional. And so the freedom multiple really it feels good, it's high, but it's not high enough to make work optional so that, on a random Tuesday, you can just do whatever you want. And so the unlock here is to start defining what enough actually looks like as a number for you, as a lifestyle. Okay. And then you want to calculate that exact number and calculate what your exact freedom multiple is. It's different for everybody. And if you want something precise, you've got to calculate it and you got to start measuring, because what gets measured gets managed. And that's how you close the gap. And so the takeaway here is that level 5 is probably one of the more comfortable traps that we fall into. And the distance between 15 and 25 feels small from the outside, but it's a big gap to close, and you got to stay focused at this point. So flexibility feels good, but you got to stay focused. And so the next level of wealth really is work optional. Okay, so that means that Tuesday morning is yours. Your assets cover your lifestyle indefinitely. You work because you want to, right? And so the game changes at this point. Once you've reached a freedom multiple of 25 plus, that's it. And now you need to shift a little bit. And so the trap here is that people think it takes millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars. I hear $5 million a lot from some of my clients, but it usually requires a lot less. And so if you designed a life that is worth living, not a life that's worth impressing people for, the bigger trap is reaching the level and not knowing how to stay here, right? Okay. Because now we have to shift to protect and distribute and, make sure that we don't over withdraw and things like that. And so the unlock here is that you stop playing to win and you start playing not to lose. Okay. And so the game changes entirely once you're at a multiple of 25 plus, or you're getting close to that. There's tax strategy, withdrawal sequence, drawdown protection. You've won, but you still have to protect it. And it's worth thinking about your work optional status and what that looks like. You want to begin with the end in mind if you're at some of these earlier stages, like your foundation or your stability or something like this. And so the takeaway here is that work optional isn't necessarily the finish line, right? It's the beginning of a different kind of game that you need to play. And the system that got you here is not necessarily going to be the same system that's going to keep you there, okay? And so that brings us to our very last wealth level, and that's living legacy. And so your wealth at this point enriches the lives around you. Your freedom multiple is 25 plus with some surplus and margin on top of that. And so at this point, you've taken care of yourself, right? And you've given a lot of work and you've put in a lot of time and effort into getting here. And now is an opportunity for you to give some forethought and start to pay it forward early while you can actually experience it. Right? And so your freedom is funded, and now the surplus is the mission. And so what about your children's freedom? What about a mission? So a cause or community that you really want to be involved in? What about your estate structure? How is that going to work? Trust, giving strategies, things like that. Intentional transfers early on when your children need it the most, right? And so the idea here is that you want to do all that while you're still alive, right? Because when you're gone, you can't experience it. And so the trap here is thinking that this level is only for the ultra rich. It's not. It's not necessarily about scale. It's about structure, and it's about knowing your numbers. And it's about understanding what it takes to create a fulfilling lifestyle for yourself, and in back and reverse engineering the process so that you can get there. Okay. And so the unlock here is that you want to be working through estate planning, trust, and giving strategies early on in your wealth journey so that you can give some of that surplus away when it really matters the most to your kids and things like that. A great book on this is the book Die with Zero. Love this book. If you haven't read that, that's something that you can really check out. And so the next step, where do you go from here? And so here's the thing. If your freedom multiple is telling you which level you're at, and what you do next depends on really where you stand. So if you really want some help with this, if you want to calculate your freedom multiple, your freedom number, you want access to my critical mass calculator, and you want the tools and the frameworks to start moving toward that number, you can start by joining my free community. It's for STEM professionals and analytically minded people who are serious about work optional. And if you find yourself at that level 4 or 5, where the freedom multiple is between, like, say, 2 and 15, and you really want to compress that gap, then the accelerator might be for you. This is the exact system that I use to help my one-on-one clients, and also the system that I use to invest now over $15 million in client assets as of the recording of this video. And so the accelerator is built for that. If you think that's for you, you can apply inside of financial engineering school. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. If you've enjoyed the video, leave a comment, a like, and sign up at Financial Engineering School. I'll see you in the next one.